Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So what I want to do in this video is I want to cover a topic that, to be honest with you, I didn't even know about until today. I can't believe I've never known about this because this is exactly what my videos on spirituality have been concerning lately. We've been talking about intuition and we've been talking about the divine and privileging your intuition as quote unquote God, and how intuition is the insights that you get from God, no matter what your relationship with God is. I mean, God could be your relationship with the Christian God or the Muslim God or yourself as God. It doesn't matter. But intuition, in a way, it's kind of like your pipeline to the insights from God, or Jung might say, from source, from the collective unconscious. So intuition would be being able to tap into the collective unconscious, being able to tap into the soul, right? And the concept that I learned today, which is it's a barrier that's placed in front of that. It's like a threshold guardian on your spiritual path. And that is this idea of frame control from another, or even you frame controlling yourself. And what I want to do is I want to discuss Kant's account of judgment, specifically intuitive judgment. But before I do that, I want to discuss frame control and how it's used to manipulate. It could be you manipulating yourself, it could be another manipulating you. But this concept of frame control, I can't believe I've never heard of this before. I guess it's used heavily in like the pickup artistry community, which I know nothing about, where guys try to frame control women in order to manipulate them to get sex. But then I'm like, wow, man, this has got to go like much deeper than that. I started to see frame control everywhere, honestly. I mean, yeah, that's a nasty use of it, but man, I mean, frame control is much more general than that. So what I did is I have an article from ChatGPT that I want to read about what frame control is. And then I'm going to look at Kant's account of intuitive judgment and show how this is a great example of how frame control is used. Like, it's a way of like philosophy stepping over its philosophy not staying in its own lane and trying to dictate things that really have more to do with spirituality than with philosophy. I've talked about this in my last couple of videos, how the problem with philosophy is you're trying to find a one-size-fits-all kind of reasonable answer, and that doesn't apply to spirituality. Spirituality is all about your connection to God. However you define God is up to you, or source, or collective unconsciousness, or just being wide open and just saying, I don't know what it is, but I know that I'm getting these insights and I know that I'm tapping into this wisdom that ain't coming from another human and it ain't coming from me, quote unquote, my ego. It might be coming from me in a higher sense, but it doesn't matter, right? The point is that either you're open to trusting your own intuitive insights or you're not. And if you want to be like really high level in this work, if you want to like have some crown chakra attainment, it's not about letting somebody else frame control you. The crown chakra is the crown. It's the king, right? And we'll talk about chakras in my next video because I've done a lot of work in the last week on chakras, like the chakras that I'm strong in, the chakras that I'm weak in, and how I'm going to be doing starting a new chapter with, developing the chakras that I'm weaker in. So first of all, let's read this ChatGPT article on What is frame control and how is it misused to manipulate people? Frame control, I'm quoting now from the article. Frame control is the practice of influencing how a situation, interaction, or piece of information is perceived by others. It involves setting the frame through which people interpret reality, guiding their thoughts, emotions, and responses in a way that benefits the person exerting control. How frame control works. Frames shape perception. When two people interact, they each bring their own frame, a way of viewing reality. The person with the stronger frame typically dominates the interaction, influencing the outcome. Frame control techniques include reframing, changing the meaning of a situation to influence how someone feels about it. Preframing, setting expectations in advance to guide interpretation. Deflection, steering a conversation away from undesirable topics. Authority framing, establishing oneself as the expert or dominant voice. Scarcity framing, creating urgency by implying something is rare or exclusive. How frame control can be misused to manipulate people. While frame control can be used positively, for example, in leadership, persuasion, and negotiations, it can also be exploited to manipulate and deceive. Some ways it is misused include 1. Gaslighting. Manipulators use frame control to make victims question their own memory or perception. For example, "You're overreacting. That never happened." 2. Shifting the frame to avoid accountability. Instead of addressing criticism, manipulators reframe it as a personal attack or irrelevant concern. For example, "Why are you always so negative?" instead of responding to valid criticism. 3. Creating false dichotomies. Forcing people into a limited set of choices that benefit the manipulator. For example, "Either you're with us or against us," when there are actually more nuanced options. 4. Dominating social interactions. Controlling conversations by interrupting, speaking over others, or using social pressure to silence dissent. For example, a salesperson who insists, "This offer is only for people who are serious about success." 5. Fear and scarcity framing. Creating a sense of urgency or fear to push people into making irrational decisions. For example, "If you don't act now, you'll miss out and regret it forever." 6. Reframing manipulation as helpfulness. A manipulator may frame control tactics as mentorship or guidance. For example, "I'm just trying to help you see reality," when they are actually distorting it to control the person. For all you teachers out there. 7, using authority to dismiss others. Manipulators may assert that their knowledge, experience, or position makes them the only credible voice. For example, "Trust me, I've been doing this for years. There's no other way." This one comes up with spiritual teachers. I've seen this one used by many, many spiritual teachers. Let's read that one again. Let's read the last two of these again and think about how they apply to spirituality. So 6, reframing manipulation as helpfulness. A manipulator may frame control tactics as mentorship or guidance. For example, "I'm just trying to help you see reality or see the truth," even when they are actually distorting it to control the person. "I'm just trying to help you become spiritualized, right? Or something like that. When actually what they want to do is they want to control that person. I mean, think of some, I mean, I'm not saying that this applies to anybody, but think of somebody like, Charles Manson, right? The reason why these girls were so attracted to him is because he would do LSD and then he would get on this like soapbox and start talking about, how he's all spiritual and stuff, and they bought into that, right? I'm this guy who moved to San Francisco, who's engaging with all these hippie girls, but I'm this predator, and in his own words, that just came out of prison, right? I just came out of prison. I can play guitar. I can talk the lingo that all these hippies talk about. But I'm doing it because I'm the boss, right? So I signal myself, right, as being the spiritual guru, but I'm not doing it to help you. I'm doing it so that you can help me, right, ultimately. Number 7, using authority to dismiss others. Manipulators may assert that their knowledge, experience, or position makes them the only credible voice. For example, trust me, I've been doing this for years. There's no other way. There's no other way. Trust me. Now you can see why this is a problem with spirituality, with you tapping into your own relationship with God and loving that relationship. It's like, again, this threshold guardian has appeared between you and that hero's journey. That's spiritual enlightenment, is when you can kill that threshold guardian that's in your way between you loving yourself and listening to yourself. Instead of listening to yourself, this other thing is convincing you to listen to it, right? It's a very simple dynamic, actually. It's a relationship problem. You're trusting another more so than you're trusting yourself. Because the other has to be the correct self. I don't care where it's coming from. Some kind of philosophy, whether it's coming from some kind of ideology, some kind of person on the internet, right? Somebody, whoever it is, it doesn't matter. It's that threshold guardian that is standing in the way of you being you and loving you and listening to you. Okay, finally, how to defend against manipulative frame control. Recognize when someone is trying to control the narrative. Ask questions to challenge the frame. Why does it have to be this way? For example, stay grounded in your own perspective rather than accepting someone else's without scrutiny. Seek emotional reactions that can be exploited. Strike that. Avoid emotional reactions that can be exploited to strengthen the manipulator's frame. You see this all the time, right? With narcissists. How narcissists are especially good at reframing in a social way people that they don't like. And so the narcissist may be doing bad things to someone and the person blows up, and then the narcissist will go see that person is a psychopath or something like that. They can't even control their own emotions, when actually what they're doing is they're projecting their own psychopathy onto that person so that all the other people get confused, right? They get frame controlled by that manipulative person. Seek outside perspectives to counteract manipulative framing. Now, this is hard when you first get into something because you're looking for somebody to tell you what it's about. And that's good. Like, I think you can be a spiritual teacher as long as you don't try to frame control people that you have the one right answer or the one right truth. Because that's encroaching on, that's only going to be a threshold guardian between them and their own awakening to God, so to speak. You cannot awaken somebody else with your God. You got to give them the right to find their relationship with God, and however way they do that, whether they do it through religion, whether they do it through philosophy, whether they do it through spirituality, however they do it, that's like, that's off limits to you, right? It should be. It's like getting too like inappropriately intimate with somebody's mind instead of their body. Right? Like we tend to think of like people getting like weirdly intimate with another person's body is bad. But getting weirdly intimate and manipulative with somebody's mind is just as bad too. And I've known about this concept really for years, but it's really been in the last few months that I started to spend a lot of time alone. And I started to just really listen to myself and love myself, like from a deep spiritual way. I've made some, what I think are pretty good spiritual videos on this. And it does, it's like you just have to trust yourself. It sounds so simple, but like you have to get rid of that threshold guardian who is standing between you and yourself. See, there's always some threshold guardian that's going, you need me, right? And that's like the big boss in the video game, right? For spirituality. If you're a teacher, you don't have to frame yourself that way. You can dial it back a little bit and be a little bit more humble there and say, I don't want to be that threshold guardian for you. See, that's just creating another hurdle for you. Now, every battle is worthwhile. I mean, but, certain people are going to defeat that threshold guardian, right? But it just limits the amount of people. Like you would think that if you wanted to teach spiritual enlightenment, you'd want to make it as easy on people as you could, right? But that involves like understanding that it's intuition that is the most important link, not some conceptual frame, right? That's why you got, philosophy can be a huge threshold guardian with regard to your relationship with God. And, as someone who was religious at one point, I can tell you right now that if you're religious and you believe in God, you have a channel with God and God gives you insights. Well, it's the same thing in spirit. It's exactly the same thing. The only difference is that religion has all these rules. Religion has this rule set to it that eventually, it gives you, like it sets you up in a little way to have the relationship with God, but it can actually become a threshold guardian in that relationship between you and God too, because now you're worried about what other Christians think or what the Bible says. These things actually get in your way of your direct relationship with God. So it works the same way in religion that it works in spirituality. But in spirituality, the Bible isn't given to you from another. It's not given to you from a religion. It's not given to you from philosophy. The Bible is created by you. See? So if you look at my videos, I let my intuition weave a philosophy, but it's a philosophy that is entirely coming from intuition. Yes, the philosophy is there, but when I'm making a video, I'm opening up and just letting whatever flows flow. Like I don't sit there with a huge agenda when I'm making a video and then try to prove something. I don't fall back on philosophy. Like I'm not like putting a stake in the ground. I'm not trying not to. I mean, it very well is happening, but it's happening organically. It's not happening by me, saying I'm going to put this stake in the ground and try to defend this position like intellectuals typically do. Okay, friends, so we are 2/3 of the way through the video. What I want to do in the last third is I want to talk about Kant's account of judgment, specifically intuitive judgment, and show how this is like such a great example of frame control. But even Kant saw the loophole. It's not entirely bad. Kant saw the loophole here. He just misclassified being. So I'll take a break. I'll come back and we'll talk about this. Just give me 1 second. Man, if there's an example of frame control in philosophy and spirituality, it's got to be Kant. And let me explain why. So Immanuel Kant is one of the greatest Western philosophers. And he was around at a time, he came right after Spinoza. After Spinoza and Descartes, after Hume, and before Hegel, before Schopenhauer. Now, what Kant's thesis is that there's this mind with a capital M, he called it cognition, that creates what you perceive and what you can think, what you can perceive and what you can think. So in other words, there's the human, and then there's God. God is, well, actually, he didn't use the word God. He called it the noumena. Kant actually thought that the Christian God was, he tried to defend Christianity using his critique of practical reason, making like other kinds of arguments like, well, we can't really know religion, but if we didn't have religion, bad things could happen. Therefore, from a practical standpoint, religion is reasonable. But we cannot prove that God exists, using pure reason, what he called pure reason. But he thought that using pure reason, that there's this frame, the mind with a capital M, that contains these, almost like it's like a machine. And it takes whatever is out there preconditioned and gives you what you take to be your human experience and your human thinking. So it's like we're in the matrix, and there's this mind with a capital M that is creating the matrix, but what's on the other side of the matrix, we can't know. But we do know that there's something on the other side of the matrix. So you can see how he's kind of similar to Plato in a way. Although Plato would say that we do know what's on the other side of the matrix, and it's conceptual. Kant was like, no, what we do know for certain is the mind with a capital M. That's taking the forms and creating the cave, if you know anything about Plato's cave. So there's the illusion, and then there's the really real. So the really real is being filtered down through ignorance from Plato's perspective to man. Man doesn't have the really real. He just has the rough, right? So man is necessarily kind of like not enough. There's a frame right there, right? Man needs education to be able to know reality. So even Plato has this mentality. Ditto for Kant. Kant would say, unless you understand mind with a capital M and you understand the conceptual way that reality is being filtered down to you, then you can't understand your own delusion. And it's only through Kant's frame of the mind with a capital M that you can be cured of this. And he tries to give it like a philosophical, I mean, you got to give him credit for this. This is why it's philosophy. He tries to ground that in reason and argument. But what an attempt to frame control somebody, though. That's like saying you don't have access to the really real and the truly true. That there's this threshold guardian that's standing between you and God. And really there ain't no God. Not the way you like to think. That's all metaphysics. That's all BS. That's all, you might as well flush it down the toilet. It's a pipe dream. I mean, what a threshold guardian in spirituality. I mean, I could say like in philosophy, okay, it's one thing, but like when philosophy tries to get out of its own lane and gets in the spiritual lane, I mean, this is like telling people like, you can't own the truth for yourself. You can't. And as Kant is like this little voice over here, like a bird chirping in your ear telling you, you can't, you can't. You're like, you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to cut this bird off, right? Because I'm going to prove it to you. I have this epistemology. I have this metaphysic. I have this blah, 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 blah. It's like that teacher in Charlie Brown, the wah, 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 right? You just go, whatever, you go do you and leave me alone, right? Stop trying to frame control me with this. This isn't helping me. This is interesting philosophy. No, there's no question about it. But see, spirituality is about trusting yourself. It's about the buck stops here. It's about getting beyond standing in your own way. And it's about like widening your connection to source and listening. It's very similar to religion without all the baggage to it. See, I'm starting to really realize that there's not as much of a difference between religion and spirituality as one might think. Because even spiritual people can be brainwashed with all this like nonsense. Because, that's great for philosophy. That's great for theology. That's great for religious studies or whatever it has to be. You want to intellectualize that, make a career out of that. That's up to you. But if we're talking about your relationship with yourself and your love of yourself at the deepest level, and you listening to yourself and manifesting the insights that you receive from yourself or from God, God doesn't have to be yourself, but from God, that's what spirituality is about at the highest level. So let's read this and it'll make sense. So I said, can you give me a brief account of Kant's account of judgment, specifically intuitive judgment? ChatGPT. Kant's account of judgment is central to his critique of pure reason and critique of judgment. He distinguishes between determinative judgment, where a particular is subsumed under a given concept, as in applying known rules, and reflective judgment, where the mind seeks a universal principle for a given particular. Regarding intuitive judgment, Kant generally denies that human cognition involves purely intuitive understanding. For Kant, humans possess only discursive intellect, meaning our knowledge depends on concepts and requires synthesis through the faculty of judgment. In contrast, an intuitive intellect, which Kant sometimes attributes to God, would grasp things immediately without the need for conceptual mediation. That's why I said, isn't this interesting that Kant, he gets it right, but he doesn't attribute God to man. He says there's this like threshold guardian between man and God. But he kind of rightly says, in contrast, an intuitive intellect, which Kant sometimes attributes to God, would grasp things immediately without the need for conceptual mediation. There you have it. Right? That said, reflective judgment, particularly in aesthetic and teleological contexts, operates in a way that might resemble intuitive judgment. For example, aesthetic judgment in the critique of judgment is based on feeling rather than determinate concepts. When we judge something as beautiful, we do so in a way that feels immediate, akin to intuition, but lacks a fixed rule. Teleological judgment, judging something as purposive, teleological judgment, also involves an intuitive-like grasp of order without deducing it from strict conceptual rules. So he's like, yeah, there's this kind of aesthetic and teleological intuitive judgment, but it ain't God's intuition. In conclusion, while Kant does not follow for While Kant does not allow for genuinely intuitive judgment in human cognition, in the sense of an immediate intellectual grasp of truth, he acknowledges that some judgments, especially aesthetic and purposive ones, function in a way that is less discursive and more immediate than ordinary cognitive judgments. So let's read this again, and you can see where Kant is setting up this threshold guardian. Like, you as a human, you can't have God's intuition, right? So while Kant does not allow for frame control, does not allow for genuine, who gives a fuck what this guy allows for, right? When you're talking about your own relationship to God. While Kant does not allow for genuinely intuitive judgment in human cognition in the sense of an immediate intellectual grasp of truth, which only God has, he acknowledges that some judgments, especially aesthetic and purposive ones, function in a way that is less discursive and more immediate than ordinary cognitive judgments. Okay, friends? I'm a minute over my time. Hopefully, I've talked about frame control, the threshold guardian of frame control when it comes to the highest levels of spirituality and spiritual enlightenment. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next week. Take care.